刻むぜ! I'm on the beat!
It's time for another JoJo anime and manga differences. After a full year since the release of the first batch of Stone Ocean, this serves as not just the end of Part 6, but is also a cap on an entire 10-year run of the anime that covers JoJo's original continuity. I have a lot of thoughts on the batch and anime adaptation as a whole, some of which you're going to hear in this video, and possibly in a separate one down the line. Though today we're here to take a look at all the changes made between the manga and the anime. Obviously, this video will spoil the entirety of the final batch of Stone Ocean, so it should go without saying that you should watch the season before this video. The last batch ended with the jailhouse lock fight and Jolene's escape from prison in chapter 102. Rather than immediately picking up from the next chapter in the manga, the first episode of the batch includes a new scene of Jolene, Hermes, and Emporio right after escaping. As I'm sure anyone who has read the manga or has watched the end of this season would recognize, this scene takes place at the gas station that also serves as the location of the ending. The scene mostly acts as a way to transition naturally back into the story, and also shows a rare light moment between the characters. The next scene in the manga is Pucci's encounter with the three sons of Dio and the first real reveal of Ungalo's power. However, the anime moves this scene to slightly later, and instead goes straight to the scene between Anasui and Weather. Some of Anasui's dialogue before seeing the birthmark is removed. The scene also shows his immediate reaction to seeing it, by moving some of his dialogue from the bathroom scene to here. The scene of Pucci in the taxi now has a radio broadcast announcing Jolene and Hermes as fugitives, and narration from Pucci about how she's coming after him. The subtitle from the Three Musketeers book is removed. The anime also no longer shows Pucci paying the driver. In the manga, the hospital sign simply said State Hospital, but now it has been changed to Florida Lucky Land West Hospital. This is a reference to Araki's personal company, Lucky Land Communications, which he leaves references to throughout the series. Pucci no longer sees the three shooting stars before the ambulances arrive, and instead sees them while he's being held hostage. The design of Rekiel on the stretcher has also been updated to match how he appears later. The anime no longer shows the full body of the pedestrian sign character that Ungalo brought to life. The old man no longer says when he got his knee injury. The anime removes the scene of Weather struggling to use the sink. In the manga, Weather asks Anasui if he has painted over the prison logo on his back. In the anime, Anasui is the one who mentions them both no longer having the logo. The anime now zooms in on the male bathroom sign, showing that the stick figure there was also brought to life by Bohemian Rhapsody. Anasui no longer mentions Disney World by name, and just refers to it as a famous theme park. His lines about the history of Disney World are also removed. He also no longer mentions Mickey Mouse by name. He simply refers to him as a very famous character. He also no longer points out the billboard missing the character. In the manga, Mickey briefly appears in the back of the truck, with only his tail being visible. Pinocchio later confirms that this was Mickey, but that he left soon after. In the anime, Mickey is no longer present, and instead of his tail, Anasui now sees Pinocchio's hat. In the manga, one of the dwarfs mentions the T-2000 Terminator. This kind of Terminator never actually appears in any of the movies. I think there's two possibilities for why this was the case. First is that it could be a typo, and the other is that Araki may have been trying to make a reference to a future movie, since Stone Ocean takes place about a decade ahead of when it was written. However, no such movie that had a T-2000 ever came out. In the anime, the dwarf instead mentions the T-1000 from Terminator 2. Some of the dwarf's dialogue about their relationship with Snow White is removed. In the manga, the radio broadcast mentions that Mickey has disappeared. In the anime, this was changed to be Batman. The billboard showing the E.T. adventure from Universal Studios has been removed. The dwarfs no longer mention Anasui giving Weather the apple and book. The anime no longer shows Anasui trying to pull up his body with diver down. In the anime, the dwarfs no longer mention Burger King, and instead just call it a burger shop. In the manga, Anasui has a conversation with Weather after killing Pinocchio, and then is distracted by the old man. In the anime, Weather already left with Anasui's body and he's alone with the old man. In the manga, Anasui realizes that he is now the body and that his spirit is on the bus with Weather. Since the body can't summon his stand, he has to have the spirit do it. In the anime, Anasui is still the spirit and is able to summon his stand fine. During the scene on the bus, Weather gives new narration that gives us the information that was cut from the conversation with Anasui a minute ago. In the manga, a man is climbing on a ladder to try to be the first one to shake hands with Spider-Man and is knocked over by Anasui. In the anime, the man is no longer on a ladder and is pointing at Batman rather than Spider-Man. The character's hand is also no longer visible. During the news broadcast about Kenshiro and Rao from Fist of the North Star, the manga mentions that after Rao appeared, he killed several fantasy heroes before being beaten by Kenshiro. The anime no longer mentions this part and just talks about them fighting. As an extra fun fact, the voice actor for this newscaster in the anime is Shigeru Chiba, the narrator for the Fist of the North Star anime. In the manga, Anasui sees the store owner with Snow White after encountering the goat, but in the anime it happens before. The scene showing the birth of Venus alive in Italy is removed, as is most of the exposition about how characters disappear from film after pictures are taken of them. During the news broadcast, the anime now shows the Mona Lisa is missing as well. In the anime, the dwarfs no longer reappear to mention Anasui killing the wolf being part of the Red Riding Hood story. The portrait of Van Gogh no longer gives Weather a quiz of how many self-portraits he did, instead he just tells him. The anime now shows the two cops from before as different characters. One is based on the painting, The Girl with a Pearl Earring, and the other seems to be based on Heracles from Greek mythology. During the scene of Ngalo on the plane, the manga showed Peter Pan and Tinkerbell outside, while in the anime it's Aladdin and the genie. The scene of Pucci speaking to the three sons of Dio in the hospital is now shown before Ngalo's defeat. In the anime version of this scene, Versus now has a shirt, which matches his outfit from later. Rakiel's face is now also obscured by shadow here until he is properly introduced later. Van Gogh no longer mentions how he's afraid of the gun and wants to avoid it. The manga included another news broadcast about how countries with large entertainment industries will be affected economically. This still plays in the anime, but it's drowned out by Ngalo when he starts yelling at the little girl. The book that the girl is reading is also changed to match Aladdin instead of Peter Pan. When Jolene and Romeo meet again, Jolene no longer asks if he's driving a Ferrari. The scene of Rakiel being cured by Pucci is moved to later in the fight as a flashback. Some of Emporio's dialogue about flying the helicopter was removed. Hermes no longer gets cold and asks Jolene to close the window. She also no longer notices one of her hands getting larger because of the Skyrod attack. Some of Hermes' questions about what the Skyrod is are removed. In the flashback, the majority of Pucci's exposition about the Skyrods is skipped over. The scene where Jolene and Hermes decide to start throwing rocks at Rakiel is removed. Instead, Hermes throwing them is a surprise. Jolene also no longer throws rocks at him after this. In the anime, Rakiel no longer counts down Hermes' fingers as he disables them. He also no longer starts controlling Hermes' muscles with the Skyrods. Emporio's explanation of the Skyrod's effects on the organs is now less detailed. Jolene no longer starts coughing up lung tissue because of the attack. Much of the detailed information about Skyrods, which was seen on its info page in the manga, is not present in the anime. When Rakiel messes with Jolene's perception, the effect of her attacking his afterimages is much different. In the manga, it looks like he crumbles away, while in the anime, he distorts around her. The manga includes a scene of Anasui and Weather right outside the hospital when he senses the presence of the three people with the birthmark nearby. The anime skips past this and inserts a new scene showing them walking on the way to the hospital. The actual scene plays later, once the fight with Underworld has started. In the anime, Pucci no longer moves the table to Versus to let him try the food. His line about not wanting his bullet wounds to open up is moved from this scene to a few moments later when he gets him to stand up. The anime adds a security guard who tells everyone to evacuate after the gunshot from Underworld. Jolene no longer sees the spoon when she first looks down in the hole, she only sees it later when she actually enters it. The flight attendant no longer mentions the fuel level being responsible for the crash. In the manga, the backstory for Versus is told by a narrator in third person, while in the anime, it's told by himself in the first person. It's no longer mentioned that Versus's stepfather was a womanizer. Here's one I thought was a change, but turned out to be mistranslated. In the current fan translation of the manga, the person who bullies Versus is described as a guard of the detention center, while in the anime he's said to be a gang henchman. However, in Japanese, the manga actually does describe him as a gang member, not a guard. Specifically, he's called an errand boy for going outside the prison, which is fitting considering he was trying to hide a knife. In the manga, the scene of Weather getting his disc back takes place in the hospital lobby, while in the anime it's outside. Weather no longer asks Anasui to come have fun with him after he gets his memories back. The explanation of the ozone layer and the small scene of Versus outside the hospital are moved to happen later. Hermes no longer starts turning into a snail in the hospital, so a lot of the moments that involve that are removed, like Hermes crawling up the walls, being thirsty, and growing eye stalks. Instead, a new scene happens later where Jolene and Hermes are hit by a snail driving a car. They land on piles of snails, and this is when they start transforming. This also changes the reason for Jolene's transformation. In the manga, she begins turning into a snail when she tries driving the car, and says that she touched some back in the hospital. Moving back a bit, when the cops turn into snails, the anime goes way farther with their transformation, with one of them turning almost entirely into a giant snail. The scene of Weather picking up the two girls and electrocuting them is removed. The Heavy Weather arc as a whole was rearranged in a lot of ways, one of which is moving multiple scenes to be shown before the Pucci and Weather flashback. One of these is Jolene and Hermes' escape from the hospital. The biggest change to this scene is of course that Hermes isn't a snail, so she no longer says she's having trouble using her stickers. When they almost fall onto the snails in the manga, it's because Hermes is losing her grip because of her hands, while in the anime it's because of the wall falling over. How they escape is also changed. In the manga, Jolene used one of Hermes' stickers on the door, then removed it by breaking the door when they fell on it, which caused them to slide outside. In the anime, Hermes places a sticker on the wall that fell over, and Jolene throws the copy of it through the door for them to ride out. Jolene and Hermes now appear at the end of the scene of Versus attacking Emporio, and he has to move him out of the way to avoid being seen. The manga just shows the two of them stealing a car, while in the anime, they use the car that they were hit by in the new scene. The manga reveals the snail-eating beetles here when they steal the car, while the anime doesn't show it until after they apprehend Versus. Versus no longer mentions the specific football team and player that he dug up. The anime now shows Jolene using one of Kiss's stickers to pull Versus closer. It's after this in the anime that the car is stolen and they find the beetles. Then a rearranged scene of Anasui and Weather is shown that takes some of their conversation that happens later. It's after all this that the Pucci and Weather flashback is finally shown. The scene of Pucci meeting Dio is now shown after the scene of the young Pucci at the cemetery. The church scene now starts with Pucci praying for his twin brother, who he assumes is dead. Some of the narration about Pucci's family and his decision to become a priest is played here, rather than after the scene like it is in the manga. Other parts of the narration are used in the prayer Pucci does. The girls in the diner no longer comment on Weather's tan skin. The appearance of Weather's attackers was changed to remove their hoods. At the end of the flashback, an extra shot is added of Weather being imprisoned. The snail bird and snail dog are no longer shown. A new scene is added of the group driving with Versus to find Weather. Some of Weather's dialogue while they're searching for Pucci is removed. In the manga, the snails jump at Anasui, which causes him to transform, while in the anime it happens only due to the sunlight. The anime no longer shows the beetles approaching Anasui to eat him. Pucci no longer directly mentions the campaign poster with subliminal messages or the 1957 movie Picnic that supposedly contained them as well. However, each of these are still shown in the background of this narration. In the manga, Pucci is shown removing his eyesight discs. In the anime, the discs are already removed, which makes more sense with how he had not already transformed. Much of Pucci's dialogue about the effects of subliminal messaging are removed. The prime numbers that Pucci counts while Weather is holding him are different. In the manga, the direct reveal of Pucci killing Weather happens immediately after the car accident. In the anime, it isn't shown until Jolene views the memory of it shortly after. Pucci's dialogue from that scene is placed here in the anime, said by the repeating images. The anime adds Emporio to the scene of Weather's death, and he's shown looking at his body when Jolene first finds it. In the manga version of this scene, he was seemingly still unconscious in the car. In the anime, he is also now the first person to pick up Weather's disc, while in the manga, it was Anasui. A small amount of Anasui's dialogue after Weather's death is removed. The anime now shows the ring Jolene threw on the ground next to the alligators. Some of the narration introducing Cape Canaveral is skipped, and is instead combined with the scene of Emporio reading the information from his ghost computer. The scene of Pucci first entering the Kennedy Space Center is moved to slightly later. The anime now shows that while Emporio is driving, he has something strapped to his feet so he can reach the pedals. The time that Emporio says it is until the new moon is slightly longer in the anime. The anime adds some reactions from Anasui and Emporio to C-Moon's first appearance. During Jolene and Pucci's fight, a scene is added of Anasui catching Emporio when he falls. In later scenes, the two are now seen together because of this change. Multiple scenes showcasing the effects of Made in Heaven on the world are removed. These include the jump roping children, the daytime television show, the news program showing commercials, the students taking a test, the man pouring soy sauce, the man talking on the cell phone, the first scene of the manga artist, and the couple having sex. Some of the other scenes showing Made in Heaven are moved a bit earlier before Pucci strikes the group in the ocean. The people becoming nauseous in the elevator is removed, as well as the people reacting to the body rotting. During the newscast, the people disagreeing with the man who drops the cup are removed. Jotaro's death scene is more dragged out than it is in the manga and includes new dialogue between him and Jolene. The character's body's rotting is moved to be shown after Jolene's death. More scenes from the end of the universe are removed, including the person's contact lenses and mouth drying out, the electronics breaking and the money disappearing, the woman late for her shamisen classes, the woman's breast implants fading, and the man's wig falling apart. During the scene between the replacement Jolene and Jotaro, the unconscious guard is added to the background to match the same scene from the original universe. When Pucci and Emporio meet again, Pucci's speech is extended to include some of the information that only appeared on the Made in Heaven diagram page. The two guards that Emporio run into are now already reacting to something else going on, while in the manga he simply bumps into them when he comes through the wall. Likewise in the anime, they no longer try to catch Emporio. In the manga, they're knocked over when Emporio runs past them, while in the anime, Pucci knocks them over. Emporio has a new inner monologue that explains the concept of the singularity point and universe reset, also taken from the Made in Heaven diagram. Emporio's final speech to Pucci is extended to name all of the other characters. Unlike the manga, the new universe version of Hermes is given a name. In the credits, she's referred to as Eldis. The final ending image is changed to add Foo Fighters to the group of characters. And that's all the differences in the final batch of Stone Ocean. Overall, most of the changes made seemed quite reasonable to me, and there were even long stretches of the story with hardly any, especially the C-Moon fight. Some, like the few in the Bohemian Rhapsody arc, were most likely done out of necessity. Others, like tweaks to certain scenes as well as the ending, made things flow together easier. As for the quality of the adaptation itself, I think it has the usual level of attention to detail that I would expect. The experience as a whole is definitely surreal, seeing the end of the original continuity of JoJo that I've anticipated getting animated since my earliest days of the series in 2014. Hopefully the adaptation gave you a similar experience as well, and I hope that you can come to appreciate the additions the anime has made that I outlined here. As for the future of the JoJo anime, I suspect that we'll be in a rest period for a while. It has been confirmed that all the way back in 2012, when the first 2 parts were adapted, they had intention of going all the way up to part 6. This much is already clearly evident with the imagery of the first opening, which is also repeated in the final one. I don't see this as the end, however, since in many ways I think the series has just started to expand through its marketing and merchandising both in Japan and overseas. I suspect that a Steel Ball Run adaptation is well within reach, although a substantial waiting time until then is understandable to let the end of the original series set in. Of course, when that does eventually happen, I'll be there to make another differences video, as well as for any other spin-off adapted content in the future. If you want to be updated on new videos and releases, you can join the Hum and Beat Discord using the link in the description. To receive rewards like Discord perks and some uncut videos, you can support the channel on Patreon. I've also recently introduced a new Patreon benefit. For all patrons $1 and above, they can submit questions for me to answer. I hope to answer at least one per video, so if you are a patron, don't be shy and please submit as many questions as you want. I'm accepting them either through Patreon DMs or as posts on my Patreon page's community tab. This video's patron question comes from 17-Hit Combo. He asks, what are my favorite arcs from each part? This is a question I've previously thought about a lot, so it won't be hard for me to answer. In Part 1, the section that spans from the time skip up until Dio's first defeat at the mansion is my favorite. I enjoyed how it maintained the gothic feel of early Phantom Blood before the series added other powers like Hamon. For Part 2, the chariot race against Wamu is my favorite section. I think it's the emotional peak of the part taking place immediately after Caesar's death, and it's the best showcase of Joseph's tactics in this story. For Part 3, of course, the final segment is the best. This was my single most anticipated moment for the anime adaptation, and everything about it leading up to the ending managed to drive me to tears. For Part 4, I can narrow down my favorite fight to Josuke's battle with Highway Star. It's an exhilarating chase, and that motion is somehow perfectly translated into a still image on the page. It also includes some of my favorite uses of Josuke's abilities. In Part 5, my favorite is the battle on the train with Prosciutto and Pesci. They're the most charismatic and likable of the minor villains in my opinion, and the way that Bucciarati contributed to that fight cements him as one of my favorite characters. In Part 6, I'd have to say it's Heavy Weather. The sheer amount of insanity that's introduced in the arc, combined with the drama from Pucci and Weather's backstory, makes for an incredible ride. For Part 7, I'll pick a more specific answer, with Johnny and Gyro's fight against the 11 men while under the effects of Sugar Mountain. First, the scenes of Johnny and Gyro having to spend all the money are very entertaining. Then, when you get to the conflict itself, I think it's a very underrated fight with a very clever outcome, which is rendered beautifully in Araki's original artwork. The aftermath with Johnny and Gyro out in the snow is one of my all-time favorite moments in the series. And for Part 8, I think the Vitamin C arc, which includes the flashback, is my favorite. Unlike the others, I was actually reading these chapters as they originally released, and the amount of questions from early JoJolian that it answered was extremely satisfying, as well as introducing some of the most likable characters in the part, easily one of the story's best villains, and ultimately pushing Josuke towards his new goal after discovering his identity. As a bonus, I'll include the spin-off The Spokushibe Rohan as well. My favorite of its chapters is Poaching Seashore, the story featuring Tonio. It has yet to be adapted in the OVAs, so I'm looking forward to maybe seeing it one day. Thank you for watching. This is the part of the video where I thank my $5 and up patrons. Thank you to Alex Ramirez, Doorbell, Ashton Joseph Miller, Crayon, Rigo Vids, Zukato, Sentai, Pumpkin Doge, Marrow, Almighty Quarth, Oof, Cowrie, Halil, Gatlin Grove, Lime Jinjo, 17-Hit Combo, Phantom Kai, Sponge Cake, Cakext, and Feliciano Rabaja.